We stopped last week at a juncture where Roy Slaybaugh is starting to tell us about the early childhood of these two boys that had stolen the sheriff's car and then stole another car, had this accident that put Brother Slaybaugh in the hospital. And they, we know, are the written story that I'll be reading from later this evening. Um, our last part ended with the Slaybaughs going to the penitentiary, speaking to the warden, trying to get an opportunity to visit these two boys. But in the meantime, Brother Slaybaugh is going to explain now as we pick up where we left off about these two boys. So I'm going to play it, and if it's not coming through well, please text me in the chat box and I'll see what I can do, Lord willing, to make it better.
They'd left their home in Chicago. There was 8 children in the family. The father and mother died, and the uncle had to give them away. He took the youngest boy, which is now 15 years old, raised him since he's 14 months old when the father and mother died. The older boy was 5 years old, and he was given to a rich family up in Chicago. They used him as an errand boy and cuffed him around. They'd cuff him around, and every time they'd get a chance, they'd kick him, he said. He finally ran away from home, and they finally got into detention home, and finally in reform school, stealing stuff to eat. He says, tell me, that time he called me Uncle Roy. He said, Uncle Roy, he says, I dug a little hole under the sidewalk down there, and he says, I watched through the cracks here, and there was a Italian come out with a little push cart, and he had bananas and apples and everything, and news on there, and candies. He said when he'd turn his back, I'd sneak out of that hole and I'd run and grab an apple and banana from him. He said I lived that way several days. But he said finally the police got wise to it. They raised up a board and got him and took him out. Later on, he got out of the reform school and he went and joined the Navy. How a little fellow like him, he only weighed about 140 pounds. Now how he ever got in the Navy, I don't know, but he had an honorable discharge. His place in the penitentiary showed he had an honorable discharge from the Navy. He went and got this little boy and a brother down Peoria from his uncle. They started out with start on a life of crime. That's how they struck me on the highway at Gold Beach when they was going on this life of crime. We worked and worked. We took religious literature. We had a terrible time getting into that penitentiary. We finally was working on Elder H.D. Strever's territory down around Albany, Oregon, Corvallis, and those towns he had in his district. We asked Elder Strever if he thought he could get us in that penitentiary. We've been trying for 3.5 years to get him to see those boys. He says, I can try. Even the sheriff at Gold Beach, he couldn't get us in there. He said they won't even let me go in there to see him. And so Elder Strever says, I can try. They called up the penitentiary that morning, and that happened to be a visiting day. They said, come be there at 2 o'clock, be a visiting day. We drove up in one of those Oregon mist, they call it. It was just falling in bucketfuls. And drove up to this big steel gate. There's a little rock hut over the side here. And there's a big burly fellow come out with a big rain hat and a raincoat on. And oh, he was a tough-looking fellow. He was a gatekeeper. He looked at us up against the side of the car, and we rolled the windows down. He said, what do you want here? We said, Elder Strever says, we'd like to visit the penitentiary, and these folks in the back seat would like to visit to your inmates. No, he says, it's rain today. The warden don't want anybody up there. And he went back and slammed the door shut. Rose says, Elder Strever, they can't. We've tried 3.5 years to get and see those boys. Says, we're going to try our desperately to get in there now. He said, I'll see what we can do. We wanted, he said, I have my ministerial card. That generally gives you certain privileges. He went in there and he took his ministerial card out in Oregon, Extreme Oregon, through this little window in this rock hut. And finally he come out and opened the door, or the gate. We drove in. He says, we can get up in the place anyway. Well, Rose says that'll help some if we get in, then we'll pray about it, maybe we'll get the rest of the way. So we went in there. Every place we went in there, wrong in there, it said lock your car. We locked our car, climbed up those gruesome stone steps and through those big walls about 3 foot thick stone. Went in there into a big room half as big as this. And they had a big glass counter all around, all the trinkets and things that the inmates had made in there for sale. And I presume the inmates taking care of it inside. We looked around, there's people running their uniforms here and there. And nobody says have a seat or sit down, and we're glad to hear anything. We finally stood there a little bit. Over to the right, there was a door halfway open. It said, Warden, Superintendent, keep out. No admittance. I don't know what all was written on it. You're meant to keep out of there. And Rose says, I'm going to see what he looks like anyway. The door is ajar. She walked over there and looked in. And most for me to come over, I come over and stood back away so I could see in there. There was a big desk in there. Fine-looking fellow, slightly gray around the ears. Sitting at the desk talking with another man. And he saw us down through the crack of this door. As soon as he got through talking to this man, he come out. He says, good morning, folks. He said, what can I do for you folks now? Elder Slaybaugh says, we'd like to visit the penitentiary, and these two folks like to see a couple of inmates in there. Well, he said, I think that can be fixed up all right. He says to Rose, he says, who would you like to see? She says, we'd like to see the Jones boys. He kind of smiled. He says, lady, who do you want to see? He says, we got lots of Joneses in here. That was quite a joke we spoke at the camp meeting in Oshawa, Ontario, and Elder Eric Jones is a conference president. He sat up there with us. When she said we had lots of Joneses in there, the old audience began to laugh at Elder Jones. And that was quite a joke for a while. We never thought about that when we spoke about it. And she said, we'd like to see Gordon and Berkeley Jones. He stiffened up. He says, what do you want to see those boys for? He says. I said, say not. He says, they don't see any visitors. And he says, if he wants this penitentiary, that's all right. But he says, those boys don't see. Why, he said, I don't know what the reaction would be in front of a woman. She says, Mr. Warden, she says, I'm an old lady. She says, I'm a mother. Anything those boys would say wouldn't have any effect on me at all. She says, please, we want to see them awful bad. We've tried 3.5 years to see those boys. Well, he says, you go on and visit the penitentiary, and I'll be thinking about whether it's wise for their mother. They've never had any visitors yet in this 3.5 years. So we went on and visited all through he called a fellow, and his name was Eddie Hayes. He says, he didn't send us through the guard. This Eddie Hayes was the chief censor. He censored all the mail, ingoing and outgoing, books and everything come in there. So he took us all through and lectured all the way through. He took us through the desk chamber and everything. And finally up to along the concrete wall, and there was 2 boys standing looking through a hole about 16 inches across and about a foot thick. And they just had their heads sticking out. All they could do was just stand up, and they couldn't sit down. And she says, what they got those boys in there? What are they in there for? There's 2 boys, 14 years old. Imagine in that state penitentiary. Well, he says, we call those the fish cells. Which he says, why do you call them the fish cells? Well, he kind of smiled. He says, all I can tell you, lady, is they're poor fishes. They wouldn't get into such a place, he says. And he says, we put them in there first 48 hours. He says, usually when we can take them out of there, we can do anything with them we want to. He said, they're broke down when we get them out of there. So we went on into the dining room. He says, this is the largest dining room in the state of Oregon. Today, he looked on his card. He said, we'll have 1,280 some guests. And he says, it's the quietest, too. He says, there won't be a whisper in here. And she said, there won't be a whisper. He says, no. He said, one whisper says that he's taken out right now, he said, and locked up. And there's a big balcony all around with a steel screen on it, and the guards standing around there with sawed-off shotguns and so on, watching all this group, 1,200 and some, eating their dinner. He says they have good food, but he says they don't get many desserts or anything like that. So we passed through there. We got down to the visiting room. He says, now we're coming to the visiting room. And there was a long table down through the middle, about as wide as this counter here, and steel screen up through the middle here, and glass, bulletproof glass up about this high. And he says, you sit down on this side. She says, where are the boys? He says, right along, two boys sitting right here. All the rest of them had no guards behind them down through there. But these two boys had two guards down behind them. They weren't taking any chances on him. Anyway, we sat down there, and he says we can have 15 minutes. Rose started to talk. She talked fast. I couldn't hardly talk at all that time after I had this tongue severed. And she says, this is the fellow you struck on the highway. He says the first thing he thought we'd come in there to tell him off. He said, I thought I'd listen to what you had to say, and then I'd tell you off and go back to the bullpen. He called it solitary confinement again if he talks back to anybody. He'd been in there most of the time in solitary confinement. We told him we loved him. We'd come in there to visit him. We felt sorry for him. And he says, how could you feel sorry for us after what we've done for you? Rose says, you didn't do that because you happened to. He says, that was an accident. He says, your relatives won't come and visit you, nobody. He says, no, nobody pays any attention to us. He says, we haven't heard from anybody in these 3.5 years. She says, we'll be your relatives. And I says, you can call us Aunt Rose and Uncle Roy. This younger boy was about 19 years old now, big, strong fella. A couple of big tears come down his cheeks. He says, don't say that unless you mean it. I says, we do mean it, and we'll prove it to you. So when we got back out there, visited those boys, they give us 30 minutes, and pretty soon 45 minutes, and almost an hour, and the gong rung. He says, now we must go. He says, it's their dinner time. They rushed us out there. When we got out this outer door again, the warden was out there and met us. He was a different fellow to talk to than when we went in there. We told him we'd brought some little books having them censored down there. Little religious books, they'd read them. They said, yes, we'll read anything you bring them. We told them we'd send them Bibles if they couldn't get them. And we talked to them. She preached them a regular sermon for those 45, 50 minutes. When we got out there, this warden come to the door and met us, shook hands with us, followed us out to the outside door and shook hands with us again. Rose gave me a nudge. She says she's almost overdoing it now, she says. And he says, Miss Slaybaugh, he says, you come back in here. And he says, I want to give you folks something. So he went in there and he brought in, reached back in his desk. He said, I'm going to give you one of my cards. I still have that card in my pocket here. It says, George Alexander, warden of the Oregon State Penitentiary, Salem, Oregon. He says, this is your passport. He says, take good care of that. This is the third card I've given away this year. This was the 17th day of December. Happened to be Berkeley's birthday. He says, take good care of it. And he says, that'll get you in here anytime you come through Salem. We used that. Next time we drove up this little rock hut out there, and he says, you can't get in there today. He says, the warden's gone, and he's going to be smart with it. He knew who we were. We'd had an argument with him before. So he says, just see what we have. He reached over the telephone. He says, get the Jones boys up there. He says, there's a couple of people here, the warden's card. I don't know who they are, but that's good enough for me, he says. When we drove up there again, he just opened the door and told us to go on in. He didn't ask us who it was or anything. He knew all right. But we worked on that. We sent in religious books. We sent in about 900 books and pamphlets and so on of our denomination in there. And this Eddie Hayes got to read them. And the warden read a lot of them. And they passed them out. Berkeley had Bible studies in there. The younger boy was paroled back to his father or his uncle in Peoria, Illinois. At 4.5 years. Berkeley was in about 6 years. And he come up for parole. He had 15 years tacked on him. And they looked over his record, they thought he'd been such a wild fella for a while, they'd touch him up a little, and maybe he'd go back to the way he was before. So they says, you can't get out of here with a record like you had. He says, you just well go back to your cell and stay locked up. Well, he kind of smiled. He says, that's all right, brothers, he says. He says, I'm giving Bible studies back there, and the boys are all liking it. And he says, if the Lord can use me in here as well as he can on the outside, I'll stay in here the rest of my life, he said. He smiled and told him goodbye and went back to his cell. In a few months, he come up for parole again. He says he knew he was going to make it that time. He didn't know what they called him up for, but he come up to the parole board. And they didn't question him at all. They said, get your junk and get out of here, they said. So we knew he was going to be turned loose. We was up there to meet him and got our boy out. That day we shopped all afternoon. We got two nice rooms, one for Elder Stevens' wife. He come up there. He's going to baptize him next day in the Salem Church for Saturday. He got out on Friday. And we was going to take him over to Walla Walla College and enter him into Walla Walla College. But when we got him out, I shopped all afternoon, got him a typewriter and new clothes and so on to send him over to Walla Walla College. We went over to Oregon City and stayed with Elder Glen's wife's folks at Oregon City that night. And we all drove in their car and went on to Walla Walla College the next day and entered him in the summer school. He put in 4 years there and finished in theology and went and he took education. And he taught in the Washington Conference for about 5 or 6 years as church school teacher. Later on went to Los Angeles and went teaching in public school. And friends, he was one of the first convicts that ever passed the Board of Education in Sacramento to teach in a public school. They don't let ex-convicts teach in a public school in California. But they sent in, I don't know how many letters I got about his case. And they sent to Walla Walla College. The president of Walla Walla College sent in a recommendation. The president of the Washington Conference sent in a recommendation. He'd been teaching church school up there. And they finally passed him. But it was too late to get to school. They put him on as a substitute teacher. And he taught in Alhambra and Anaheim, San Bernardino, all those towns around Los Angeles. And everywhere they need, he's teaching all the time as a substitute teacher. During the winter, 8th grade teacher in Alhambra school moved up to an office job as a man teacher. They had a real problem grade there. And so they got 60 applicants for that job. They picked Berkeley out of the whole bunch on the kind of experience he'd been through. He took that school. He told my wife, Ann, here, he says, Ann, we didn't have any school for the first day and a half. She says, what are you doing, Berkeley? He said, we're learning discipline. He says, they'd run up and hit one another and talk and throw paper wads to one another and there's commotion going. He said they wouldn't learn anything anyway. He said, I put a stop to that right now. But you know, he was very strict with them. But they just loved that boy after that. When he left there, he says that he wanted to get away from there. He come up to Ukiah, California, and went teaching in a public school up there. And he put his children, boy and girl, both in church school. They finished now and finished academy and then college. And he has a little home out there. He's still teaching in that public school up there. And we're very proud of him. We call him my boy. He always calls me Dad now. And his wife calls me Dad also. And the children call me Grandpa. The boy is about 23 and the girl's 19, I think now. They both finished school and college. So folks, this is about the end of my story now. I'm going to break off. But before I quit, I want you to go back with me for just a moment. And I want to tell you about a great appointment I have. This all happened in Spokane, Washington, where my boy was lying dying, begging me to turn to Christ. I promised him I would. And friends, on that great resurrection morning, when Christ comes in the clouds of glory to call his sleeping saints with a shout, awake, the next thing I expect to hear is that familiar voice. Hey, Dad, here I am. Come on, let's go. Thank you, folks.
It's a nice and emotional story, yes, that has been shared. I hope it's been a blessing to you. So let's finish our book now. The last chapter, An Assurance of Forgiveness. And we left off in our book with Rose and Roy having visited the warden, and now this is Rose's these are Rose's words about her experience there. Our guide took us through block after block of cells. At last we had reached the death chamber. It was a large room. Over to one side was a cell that looked like a cage made for a wild beast with heavy steel bars. Inside was a cot. He said, "Here's where we bring the men that are to be executed. We bring them up here on a Thursday night. Friday morning at 6 o'clock, their breakfast is brought to them. Then they're taken out of this cell and placed in the shower, and then a pair of shorts is placed on them. I'm one of the 5 men who help with the executions. As the time comes for the criminals to be placed in the gas chamber, it takes all a man has in him to drag him out of his cell, screaming and begging for his life. They've all been young men lately, but when they come up here, it's too late." He continued, "We've traced the lines of these young men back to babyhood, and almost all come from broken homes. Their mothers and fathers are divorced, and they were left to roam the streets. They got their early training in the movie picture houses and from reading the quote, funny papers, end quote, and comic books. Folks are making criminals out of their children in their own living rooms by permitting them to listen to crime stories on the radio. I know what I'm talking about. I see the results. God pity the children whose homes have television without censorship. Many times," he went on, "when these men are facing execution, I've had them ask me, 'What is death going to be like? Where will I be after I'm dead? What is it going to seem like to die?' I believe in the Bible and in a supreme being. I believe in God, but I don't know very much about the teachings of the Bible. I wish I knew something about the state of man in death. All I can do is point to that door and say, 'See that door over there? I don't know what's behind it, and neither do you. But Friday morning we'll open that door, and we're going to push you through and pull the door shut, and you'll have to suffer the consequences.'" Now let me see who's talking here. Let me back up. It's their guide. The guide is talking to them as he's taking them through the penitentiary. "Oh," I said, "Mr. Guard, would you read something if I sent it to you?" "Yes, I'll be glad to read something." As soon as we reached home, I sent him a book about the state of the dead. I told him not to send it back, but to leave it there for the inmates to read. His reply to my letter is this: "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Slaybaugh, I received the book you sent, and I want to thank you very much for it. I have enjoyed reading it and will pass it on when I'm finished. I am sure that you do enjoy your religion. It is really an inspiration to meet such devoted Christians in these times when you meet so many who are not. It restores your faith in people. I would enjoy hearing some more about your work and hope that you will come back to Salem soon and pay us another visit. Sincerely, Eddie Hayes." In our visit to the penitentiary, we came to another large room. This was the visiting room. It was divided through the center by a long table. On one side the convict sits, and the visitor sits opposite him. There is a partition of glass and a heavy steel screen between the prisoner and his visitor. Now we're in the visiting room, our guide explained. Looking down the table, he said, I see the warden has your boys down there. Which ones are they? I eagerly asked. Pointing to two young men, he said, Do you see those two young men sitting there? Yes. What shall we do now? You and Mr. Slaybaugh go over and sit down in front of them. How much time do we have? I asked. Let's start with 15 minutes, he said. Honey, I said to Roy, we must make every second count for the Lord. We may never get into this place again. We walked over and sat down in front of the two intelligent-looking boys. They were 19 and 23 years old, respectively, at this time. They had to sit with their arms folded in front of them on the table, and right behind them was a uniformed guard. I told the boys who we were. They looked a little surprised. I said, This is the man that you ran into. No, you didn't kill him. You may be everything else, but you are not murderers. Boys, I asked, did you ever go to Sunday school or church or read the Bible? No. Well, I said, do you have access to Bibles here? I guess they have them in the library, Berkeley answered. Boys, as soon as you get back to your cells, have a guard bring you each a Bible. Turn to the book of James, the 5th chapter, and read the 14th and 15th verses. Then you'll know why Mr. Slaybaugh didn't die. They looked at the scars on Roy's forehead, and then as fast as I could talk, I told them the plan of salvation, the love of Christ, how he gave his life for all of us. Boys, I said, you may have committed one kind of sin which has brought you to this horrible place, but we on the outside of these walls commit other sins. Sin is sin in the sight of God, regardless of how small or large. God has only one definition of sin in the Bible, and it is found in 1 John 3:4. For sin is the transgression of the law. I told them to find this text and to read it. I also told them to read the 10th chapter of John about the Good Shepherd and how he loves his sheep. I told them to especially read the 16th verse. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring. Then we told them that we loved them and wanted to help them. The older boys said, How can you love us after what we have done to you? But we do, and we're here to prove it, Roy said. Would you like to call us Aunt Rose and Uncle Roy? Please don't say that unless you mean it, the younger boy said. But we do mean it. We've brought two little books for you to read. They're being censored now. They're religious books, Steps to Christ, and Seeing It Through with God. They said they would be glad to read them. We told them we would send more, and we'll get you each a new Bible. Would you like to have us come and visit you once in a while? With tears in their eyes, they said, If you only would. Would you like to have us write you a letter now and then? And would you write back? I asked. We will if they'll permit it. On and on we talked. They told us their parents had died when they were tiny tots. We were the first visitors they had had in 3.5 years. 15 minutes, then a half hour, almost an hour passed, when suddenly a bell sounded. The guard touched the boys on the shoulder. and took them away. We promised we'd come back to visit them again soon. Mr. Hayes came then and said, "You must leave now, it's their dinner time." When we reached the administration building, the warden was waiting for us. He shook hands with us and said, "You send all that literature that you were telling the boys about. I'll see that it gets through to them. I may even read some of it myself. We've tried everything on these boys but religion. Maybe you've got something here." We started to go out the door, and he shook hands with us again. I told Roy and Elder Streever. He's almost overdoing it now. Then he asked us to come back into his office. Opening a drawer, he reached in, picked up a card, and said, "Mrs. Slaybaugh, I'd like to give you my personal card. I want you to use it as a passport. This will get you in here any time, even if I'm not here. Take good care of it. I don't give my card out to very many people. This is the third one I've issued to anyone this year." "Mr. Warden, may I have a card also?" Elder Streever asked. "Did you say you were a minister?" "Yes, I'm a minister of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Albany, Oregon." "Well then, I'd like you to have a card also," and he handed one to Elder Streever. He urged us to come back again and visit the boys any time, whenever you're in Salem or whenever you are passing through. We had an appointment to speak at a youth meeting in Phoenix, Arizona, and also one at the College of Medical Evangelists in Loma Linda, the first part of January. We didn't have time to write the boys letters before we left, but we sent 2 pretty Christmas cards. I wrote all over them, inside and out, under the pictures, every place I could write something, and smiled, and and mailed them to the boys. Then we left for Phoenix. We were gone several weeks, and when we came home, the first place we went to was the post office to get our mail. As we were sitting outside in the car, just sorting out the mail and all the Christmas cards that had accumulated, I said, "Roy, see what we've got here. Here's a letter from Salem, Oregon, from Berkeley Jones." He said, "Open it. Let's not wait till we get home. Open it and read it." Hastily, I opened the letter written on the penitentiary stationery and started reading the regulations at the top of the page. Among them it said, "Limit your letter to one side of one sheet of paper only." "Roy, they didn't get our cards," I exclaimed. "Well, go on and read, Rose," he said impatiently. "But down here in larger letters it says, 'If rules are not followed, mail will not be delivered.'" "Rose, let's read the letter," I said. I didn't get very far, for I read, "Dear Aunt Rose and Uncle Roy." And we 2 silly old people sat there and cried like babies. "Dear Aunt Rose and Uncle Roy, you asked me to use this title, and that is why I am taking the liberty of heading this letter as I have. Gordon and I received your Christmas cards and are extremely grateful to you for sending them to us, as we have no parents and haven't had any letters or cards for some time. You can surmise how much your visit and Christmas cards meant to us, and how we will appreciate any future letters from you. Gordon and I are making billfolds, and we thought you might like to have a sample of our work. So as soon as possible, we are going to send you both one. They are not what you would call masterpieces, for we are just learning, and these are our first so far. I can't quite summon the right words or phraseology to try to convey to you how sorry we are that Uncle Roy was hurt so badly in that wreck, and how glad we are that he has recovered. I am afraid that our tongue-tiedness when you were here to see us might have left some doubt as to our feelings in this matter, but taking into consideration that you are the only people to visit us in so long, and also that you have not held any grudge or bad feelings toward us for the great wrong done you, you can see why we were slightly befuddled, to say the least. Gordon will write next week, and we will both answer your letters, any letters you might send us. Although I can't think what we will write about, as there just isn't anything happening in here worth writing about, but we'll fill the page if we have to mention the weather in every other line. I'm running short of things to say, so we'll close for now, hoping to hear from you soon. Sincerely yours, Berkeley Jones. In the same mail were billfolds, one for Uncle Roy and one for Aunt Rose. They were beautiful little billfolds. Berkeley said they were not masterpieces, but in a few weeks a masterpiece did come. It was a most gorgeous purse, made of leather, hand-tooled in a beautiful design, with sterling silver trimmings. We sent each of the boys a new Bible, and it wasn't very long before they were asking, "What are all these things in Daniel and Revelation? The animals, you know." So we sent each of them a copy of Daniel and the Revelation by Uriah Smith. They wrote and thanked us for them, saying, "We received your letters. They are certainly always welcome. We also received the books you sent." And Berkeley wrote, "We have set a limit of 25 pages a day to read in Daniel and the Revelation. I believe that this is better than reading straight through the whole book. I seem to remember things longer and more of the details clearer this way." In a few weeks, we visited the boys again. After this visit, as we were leaving, I said, "Boys, is there anything more we can do for you or get for you?" Gordon spoke up and said, "We are just starved for something sweet." "Do you mean candy?" I asked. "Oh, yes, we haven't had any candy for such a long time." I said, "Boys, as soon as I get home, I'll make you some candy and cookies and send them to you." No, Aunt Rose, you can't do that. They won't permit anything like that to come through." "How can I get it to you then?" I asked. "When you sell some of our billfolds," we had told them we would sell their little billfolds for them, "the next time you come in, stop at the counter in the administration building and buy us a candy bar or two." "You don't have to wait until we sell your billfolds," Roy said. "We'll see that you get some this very day." When we left them that afternoon, we went down to the counter where they sell candy and other refreshments, and oh, didn't we have fun! "We want 2 orders just alike," I said, and started picking out the various goodies. They had a lovely little cake with white frosting and coconut all over it, wrapped in cellophane. I said to the clerk, "Do you people in here have plenty of desserts?" "Well," he said, "we have good food, but not too many desserts." I said, "Do you suppose the boys would enjoy having a cake?" "What those kids wouldn't do for a cake," he said. I said, "Send each of them one like this." As we were driving home that night, riding along in the dark, We were not saying very much. Finally, I asked Roy, "What are you thinking about?" "I wouldn't wonder if it's the same thing you're thinking about," he said. "I was thinking about the boys. I know where there might be two mighty sweet boys tonight." In a day or two, we received a letter that said, "When I think of how you and Uncle Roy have befriended us, I often wonder what we have done to deserve such kindness. I still haven't found the answer. I am really trying to tell you how much we appreciate everything you've done, but I'm afraid I'm failing utterly. We received the cake and candy you sent to us, and I may as well confess, dear, I got a stomach ache, though um, for being such a glutton. It was kind of a pleasant stomach ache, and I want to send a million thanks for the cake and candy. Gordon and I are waiting expectantly for your next visit to us. We always look forward to seeing you again." We sold some of their purses and billfolds and sent the money to them. We wondered what they would do with the first money they had earned in all those years. Now came the answer. Gordon and I are now the proud owners of a typewriter. I feel like a small child who has received some much cherished gift which he has longed for with all his heart. The typewriter is of fairly ancient vintage, but it works. Gordon and I are studying hard in school now. Next came the wonderful news that Gordon was to be paroled. He wrote us about it, and we were there when it happened, July 2, 1949. We visited the boys in the morning. Gordon was excited. He was telling us that he'd soon be leaving. At 1 o'clock, we again went back to the prison, where we met the boys' aunt and uncle, who had come from Illinois. We all met with the parole board in the warden's office. First, we had a little visit with the uncle, for he was to take Gordon home with him. We told him about Gordon's conversion and that he was taking home a Christian young man now, and that Gordon would want to keep the Sabbath. The boy's uncle and aunt were fine people. Their uncle said, "I don't know very much about this, but Gordon is going to have to work for me, and he can have any day he wishes for his day of worship." Then Gordon was brought in. He was carrying something under his arm. He came over and put his arm around Roy and said, "Uncle Roy, how can I ever thank you for what you've done for Berkeley and me? If it hadn't been for you, we might have rotted in this place." I asked, "Honey, what have you got under your arm?" "Aunt Rose, you don't mind, do you? Just now, when I bade my cell buddy good-bye, and the fellows on either side of us, they begged me to leave my Bible behind. We've been studying it together, and they wanted this, too, my Daniel and Revelation, but no one's going to get this. I don't even want it packed with my belongings." So we bade Gordon goodbye. We have visited him since. He's a fine young Christian man, starting his young life all over again. It was about 5 o'clock that afternoon when we started to leave Salem. But as we got to the edge of town, I said, "Roy, we must go back and see Berkeley before we leave. He must feel awfully lonely." It was after visiting hours. As we went into his office, I said to the warden, "Can you guess what we'd like to do?" "I don't even have to guess any more what you want to do. Go on back. I'll have him in the visiting room." He was sitting there all alone. And he did look lonely. I said, "Honey, the chair next to you looks so lonesome. It looks so empty. We, too, are going to miss Gordon." It was my fault that Gordon got into this place in the first place. He never should have been in a place like this. Well, we bade Berkeley goodbye and promised we'd come to see him again as soon as possible. The next day he wrote this letter, July 3, 1949. It sure is lonesome without Gordon. I keep forgetting he's gone, and I look for him in the dining room. Of course he doesn't come through. It's hard to explain my feelings when I think of him. I guess you could call it a happy, lonesome feeling. I'm happy that he's free, but lonesome to see and hear him again. Just a few more pages. Maybe we can finish. Berkeley was studying his Bible. He was reading all the Christian literature we sent him. We told him about the wonderful Christian colleges where our young people study and get their education, and how happy we would be if sometime it could be arranged that he could attend one of those schools and continue his study. At the close of his letter, he wrote, I've been seriously thinking of what you wrote and told me about, going to a ministerial college. The more I think of the idea, the more I like it. It would give me a chance to make something out of myself that I could be sincerely proud of. It would also give me a chance to delve further into the subject of biblical prophecy. The deeper I dig into the subject, the more astounded and intrigued I become with the accuracy of the ancient prophecies, and the more certain I become that no mere human mind could comprehend and so accurately predict forthcoming history without the guidance of some heavenly being. August 8. Now I have received the voice of prophecy um, uh, correspondence course. I believe I wrote you this before in my last letter, but I will write it again in case I didn't. I have sent 3 of the lessons in to be corrected. I was wondering if they had any set rule on how many could be sent in at a time. I could do 5 or 6 a week, but I don't know if this is advisable. Where am I supposed to write to apply for the correspondence courses which will make me eligible for college? I was talking to one of the fellows here who had completed a ministerial course of another faith, and he said the main subject you have to know is English. Can you believe that? September 4, he wrote, am eagerly looking forward to entering college if I can get the required credits, and also providing that the parole board is so kind as to grant me a parole, which I certainly hope they do. We were to leave our home now and go to the east and the south, and would be gone for some time. We knew Berkeley would not be having many visitors, although Pastor Strever went to see him as often as he could. We asked Pastor Blem from nearby if he wouldn't like to meet Berkeley and go in to visit him once in a while. Yes, I'd be happy to do that, he said. We went with He went with us on one of our visits. Berkeley was happy to meet him, a young man about his own age, a young minister. After Pastor Blem had talked with him a little while, he said, Berkeley, when you get ready to go over to Walla Walla College, I want to be the one who drives you over. I want to be the one that introduces you to the faculty, to the dean, and to the students. As we were going home, Pastor Blem said, What a horrible place that is, and what a fine young man Berkeley is. And then he added, But you know, he'll never have to thank me for anything I ever do for him. The look of gratitude that came into his face was almost divine. Pastor Blem sent him the Walla Walla College yearbook, and he enjoyed it greatly. On November 13, he wrote, Pastor Blem sent me his Walla Walla College annual, The Mountain Ash. Since receiving it, I've done nothing but wander through the pages and daydream, letting my mind take off on flights of fancy. I spoke to the professor who is in charge of the school there. He's going to give me a test next week, which will finish my high school credits, providing, of course, I pass it. I certainly am looking forward to going to college, so I will try very hard to pass the test. A year quickly went by. Then one day this letter came, dated December 17. Dear Aunt Rose and Uncle Roy, 1 year ago I met you personally for the first time. Since then I have eagerly looked forward to your visits and letters. What I want to thank you for, even more than your visits and letters, is introducing me to Christ. This, above all else, is the most priceless gift anyone can give to another, an introduction to Christ, who in turn gives those who believe and are faithful eternal life. I completed the Voice of Prophecy lessons last week and signed up for the course on Daniel and the Revelation, which they will send me in the near future. The Voice of Prophecy lessons have helped to enlighten me so very much concerning the Bible, which I wrote before had left me slightly befuddled. I have interested several others in taking this course, and those who have already received their first lessons are as enthusiastic as I am. The fellows you sent Daniel and the Revelation to have received them and want me to thank you for them. We have long talks about the Bible prophecies and their fulfillment. Most of the people I talk to are amazed at the changing of the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday by the Catholic Church. And that's where I'll stop because I can't possibly get in the last 6 pages before it's time to quit. So we'll stop there. It's in the middle of his letter to her and Uncle Roy, and we'll pick up there when we come again next time. So, are there any? Nella says it's a beautiful story. Yes, it is. And may the Lord help us to follow Mr. Slaybaugh's example. Sometimes we don't see right away the results, but one day, that's with the Lord's willing, we will see. To the Lord be the glory. And that's especially true with, I think, at least for many people, with our children. We invest time and time, teaching them, instructing them, showing things to them, trying to give them understanding of biblical things. And we may not see the result right now. But keep praying, brothers and sisters. One day we will. God has promised. Any other thoughts or anything anyone would like to share?